Welcome, Vitaly, to the podcast. Nice to have you here. One of the things that I cover on my podcast is like sort of macro trends that are happening in the world on this pale blue dot of ours that you can see from far away in the universe. So what's happening here, Vitaly? I mean, first off, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into one of the couple things that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Coming to you from Bay Area, from Silicon Valley, where I've spent most of my life, who grew up. I run Mavka Capital, which is an investment banking practice. We raise capital for growth stage companies and do M&A, probably about half and half in a few different deep tech categories: mobility, energy transition, industrial automation, prop tech, and material science, data center, and the new category we're entering is aerospace and defense. We're also in the process of raising our own venture fund, Mavka Ventures, and we have a sister company that helps kind of post-Series A deep tech companies build sales engines called Mavka Growth. Also do a lot of writing, a lot of research, and have my second book coming out later this year that's focused on political economics called The Displacement Machine, and kind of what's happening with young men in America and what might be next with AI taking over more and more jobs.
Now, the thesis of your book is that jobs will be lost, but almost on a daily basis, you hear jobs will be lost, jobs will not be lost, jobs will be lost. So you're definitely on the jobs will be lost side, is what I'm thinking. Talk about that and what your thesis would be if
Yeah.
that happens.
Well, there's no way that jobs will not be lost, right? We're talking about, the next industrial revolution, and everybody wants to be optimistic, and people say, of course, it's going to be great, and they're just naturally optimistic. But you have to look at kind of some sheer facts here. First industrial revolution took about 100 years, about four generations, and where the grandfather certainly didn't know the job that his grandkid would do. We had the second industrial revolution that took about 60, 50 years, depends how you count. So about three generations. So already kind of getting tighter and a little bit more difficult for people to make the transition. And then the computer revolution is about 40 years, starting in 70s, 80s, however you want to count. And we are part of that. So we feel that, and we know that for older generations, it was difficult to make the digital transition. Now, this one is happening within the context of one generation, within 10 years. And that means that people who will be displaced, who are already being displaced, they have to retrain. And they're still mid-career. And I don't think it's realistic for somebody who has, let's say, a high school education and is doing a, logistics job or is working in a warehouse or doing some assembly or driving a truck or doing some basic administrative work. It's not realistic for them to retrain for a career of the future and raise their level of education. So that's what concerns me. Will we get through it? Of course, we always get through everything, but it's a question of kind of pain. And if you look at, Goldman Sachs is on my side, right? They're projecting a pretty big unemployment, 10, 20%, but a possibility in the next 5 years. Um, and what we know for sure, if you study history, is that any society that gets to 20% unemployment goes fascist,
Hmm.
right? And you can see, World War II and how the Nazi Party came to power democratically is within 3 years, the middle class in Germany after World War One lost their status and lost their income and lost their ability to live, how they were used to living. And that's what creates these movements. So that's what really concerns me. Will we make the transition? Sure, but the question is kind of at what cost and what is it going to look like, and what can we do to get ahead of that, to ease that transition? Europe has famously has a good social net that is helpful here. Even China is passing regulation about robotics replacing labor and how that can be done or not done. U.S. has no guardrails, right? We're just kind of free for all, and that may take us very quickly into a brick wall. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Very interesting. One of the things I picked up on there was the truck driver. Are we that close to having automated trucks on the road?
We already have automated trucks on the road being tested. There's several companies in Europe and US and in China that are doing commercial EVs commercial AVs. They're all electric, but autonomous vehicles that are already operating in limited environments, so in mining, in big kind of rail yards, things like that. And there's already companies that are publicly traded companies, I won't name names, that are already testing this for um, on-road autonomy. And truck driver, or professional driver in the U.S. is the single biggest profession, and it's been notorious. It's a notoriously difficult profession, so there's a high turnover rate. For example,
Mm-hmm.
in trucking, truck drivers, they on average, it costs them a lot to recruit and train a truck driver, but they will stay with the company for about 10 months on average. Maybe that's stretched out a little bit, but that was a stat I remember from a few years ago. So it will solve a particular pain to begin with, because now there's platooning. So essentially, one driver is platooning several trucks behind them. So there's ways, people have been trying to solve this problem for years, but it will get to a point where it's going to be fully autonomous, and you're going to see professional drivers lose their job, and that's about 9 or 10 million people in U.S. that are in that
Mm-hmm.
profession.
Interesting. Now talk about the manufacturing side too. I think Elon Musk said that last year, or it is June now. Yeah, he said last year. He said by the end of this year, we'll have robots on the manufacturing floor of Tesla if it's not already there. But it would might be more scaled out by the end of this year.
Yeah, I mean, you have to separate the hype from reality. I would never quote Elon Musk on anything around timelines because he's never met a timeline. But the reality is that automotive manufacturing has been the most roboticized category for many years,
Hmm.
right? Because you can very much define a process. It goes in the line. It's kind of the most friendly to robotics. 10 years ago, I went to Shenzhen, went to an electronics manufacturer, and kind of on the ground floor, you saw um, a bunch of yellow suits, right? And those were the workers doing assembly. And then you had green suits that were like 1 out of 20. Those were the managers. You go to the next floor and it's only green suits and automation. And then the idea was you go to the third floor and it's just lights out, manufacturer with no human involvement. That was 10 years ago, right? So if you want to see the future, go to China and see how they're doing manufacturing. Um, Manufacturing will be more and more automated. If you go to the Porsche factory, the first time a human touches it is after it comes out of the paint
Hmm.
booth, right? So there are already major parts of the process that are automated. And there was all this hype, political hype, um, about bringing manufacturing back to the US. Yeah, maybe it'll come back, but it won't be humans. It will be robots that are doing that work.
Interesting.
So that's long gone. Kind of simple moving part from left to right and doing all those things are going to be roboticized. On the other hand, who wants to stand on their feet for 8 hours doing the same repetitive task?
Hmm.
That's no life. That's no lifestyle. Question is like, how do you get those people to be productive and feel, let them earn a living in another way? How do you retrain those people? Um, but in our fund, we're specifically looking at 5 specific categories in vertical robotics. One being healthcare robotics, which can span from surgical
Okay.
technologies that are super precise, which have been in market for a while now, surgical robots, to things in a hospital that help, for example, autonomous robots that will move hospital beds and move patients around the hospital, which makes it more efficient and faster because
Interesting.
usually that's a big pain. To things around the home, because we have aging populations from Japan to Germany and Italy and Spain to US, and other areas around the world where you need companions that will do certain things around the house. I mean, it spans from kind of delivering pills on time to somebody, all the way to literally a companion, because in Japan it's notorious people live by themselves,
Right.
and they're lonely. So that's one key category. That's probably the biggest addressable market in the next 3 to 5 years. The second one being logistics, right? So materials handling things around the warehouse. And then, of course, manufacturing automation, not just automotive, but everything else. And then autonomy, on-road autonomy, whether it's passenger vehicles or commercial vehicles or mass transit or airplanes, all those things, those are the big robots, right? That are
Yeah.
navigating the physical world with AI. And then finally, security and defense, right? We can't ignore
Hmm.
that in today's world, unfortunately. And that also bifurcates to military technology, which is basically high tech weapons. And then there's actual true defense and security, which has some dual use as well, right? Where it's more defensive and anti-drone, etc., those kind of things. So those are the areas that we look at. And broadly, if you look at the venture capital industry, the industry has already moved on. About 70% of venture capital is going into these vertical applications, kind of end user applications with revenue right on the horizon, versus the core technology that's been invested for the last, call it 10, 20 years, where we're talking about the foundation models for robotics, the different grippers and sensors and compute, kind of all these kind of horizontal solutions that gave us the building blocks to now be able to build a full solution. So about 70% of the capital goes directly now. We still have a lot of progress on the kind of core technologies, but we focus on kind of go to market and look at
Hmm.
specifically, the specific problem that they're trying to solve in their particular market.
That was a lot. I think what I feel like is that you're turning me over to now believe that there will be severe job displacement. And what are we gonna do, Vitali? Like, what are we gonna do? Are we just gonna sit around and play cards? I actually feel like that's a a realistic thing. I observe like the trading card market, for example. It's Pokemon and Magic and stuff, and there's like a renaissance in that right now. Like, there's an investment side, but there's the actual people who sit down and play it. Maybe we're just the future us are just going to be sitting around socializing and playing cards.
Well, there's a philosophical angle here and there's an economic angle, right? So
Hmm.
the philosophical angle is like, how are people going to fill their time and find what they're passionate about and their meaning in life. Everybody's gonna be
Yeah.
different there. But at a more base level, we're talking about economics, right?
Right.
And in capitalism, we have the capital and labor contract, right? They work together, capital and labor. And if we get to a point, it's never that clean. It's not going to be a clean cut. But if we get to a point where capital doesn't really need labor that much, or at some point eventually at all, then we have complete kind of sucking south. On the other
Hmm.
hand, even if you're in the B2B business and you're selling to other companies, US is a 70% plus consumer economy. So at the end of the day, somebody's selling to consumers and they're driving the economy.
Right.
So if you have an unhealthy economy where consumers have no money to spend, then nothing's going to work, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a self-fixing system in that sense. But we are going to get out of whack, right? If we don't balance all of these factors and very consciously go in a particular direction, which involves our legislature, it involves the government to be able to create these economic conditions based on what's in front of us, not what's behind us.
Right.
Unfortunately, the average age of a senator in the U.S. is probably 120. And when we're talking about, the Moore's law was, 18 months, right?
Yeah.
Every 18 months, there was a doubling of power and technology in semiconductor. The Moore's law in AI and robotics is 6 months right now, and it's only
Hmm.
going to shrink.
Wow.
So we need to get ahead of it. Every 6 months, basically we're having a quadrupling of power of AI in a year, right? And that's only getting compressed. So how do we put in the guardrails that these factors that are completely changing the economics of business, that they are not going to completely break the economics of our society, right? And I don't hear a lot, to be honest, yet from politicians who are thinking about this and putting the guardrails in place. Because if I'm a founder of an AI or robotics company, I have a fiduciary duty. That's how capitalism works. Is my job is to, it's a profit motive. I want to maximize the opportunity for my company, maximize the value, reduce the costs, increase the revenues. That's what I'm supposed to do. So without any guardrails, I'm going to maximize that.
Yeah.
So there has to be an equal playing field for everybody in that category that has, here's the
Well,
rules of the game. You can do what you want. You can be the winner. You can be number one, but you're not going to break our society. It's too dangerous, right?
so going back to that, you did offer a nice balance between So capital understands that it doesn't need labor, but also for capital to make money, it needs labor to spend, right? So
Right.
like how do you eh, like does government have to be involved there? Is that what you're saying? And regulation, is that where it comes in? There's that whole layer there that needs to be figured out, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think we need to have a reset and then understand the economics. What does that mean? How do
Hmm.
we, if people are getting displaced and if we're allowing robotics, like in China, there's a law, they just passed a couple of laws on a kind of country level and on a province level, or not province, they call it something else. But essentially, they passed laws and said you cannot lay off people to replace them with AI, with
Hmm.
robotics. Um, and there's certain rules to the game. You have to pay them a year, I think, severance, etc. You have to make sure that they can retrain. You're responsible for that. And there has to be some version of that in the US. Although manufacturing, fortunately, unfortunately, is not as big of a factor in the US as it was 25 years ago.
Hmm.
And that's the opportunity to displace that. So, but the other question is, okay, is there going to be then, you can take things that we know. So, for example, for every employee in the U.S., the company pays a tax and the employee pays an income tax, right? So, if there are no employees or much fewer employees, 10 to 1, all of that tax revenue goes away. So then we need some kind of equivalent of that being, or more so, paid by the company for the robotics, for the productivity that they have, for the productivity gain. And some of the tax revenue maybe goes as like a negative tax, meaning a refund to a certain group of people that allows them to kind of help ease the transition. Or generally, we get to this utopia that Musk's and others describe, um, that nobody's going to work, everything's going to be roboticized, it's going to be great. Well, how are people going to eat? Like, is it going to be everything's going to be free and abundant? And it doesn't work. I was born in the Soviet Union, and I can tell you that this vision of utopia and communism and Marxism, communism doesn't work. In practice, you still had people, even in the days of the Soviet Union, they were more motivated, and instead of they would go around the rules, they would essentially steal to have a better lifestyle than their neighbor next door,
Uh,
right? Because they weren't interested in that. So human nature is going to be human nature. But there has to be something. I'm not a tax expert by any means, but as a hobbyist economist, there's some very obvious gaps that need to be filled.
and this is why I guess that UBI talk, UHI talk has been surfacing. Ideas are being thrown out. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? It just seems I see it more and more.
Yeah, I mean, it's not without precedent. You look at Norway, for example.
Hmm.
They have they obviously have a lot of oil reserves, and they're taking the income that essentially country generates from those natural resources, and it pays a negative tax, right? So
Hmm.
first of all, universal basic income has become very polarizing in the U.S. US is all about slogans and brands, and what you name things in politics makes a difference. So calling it a reverse tax or negative income tax, I think everybody will get behind that, right? Republicans too. So that's one thing. But the question is, where does that come from? And is it a transition to something else? And we have a game plan that's 5 or 10 year transition, or does this become a permanent part of our economics? Is that, all these things are solved? There are some gaps that to be filled. Obviously, U.S. has now surpassed, U.S. debt has surpassed our GDP for the first time, and this could be a very long, separate conversation. Kind of inflating our way out of that is maybe the only answer. Um, but there are certain things we can reduce. So, for example, the healthcare industry in U.S. is completely broken, right? There's a profit motive. At least 40% is wasted because it's then in this kind of cycle of insurance billing and paying and administrative work that goes into all of that. I give people an example like, okay, the army exists to protect the population, and we just pay a tax, and everybody has the coverage of the army. So why don't we do the
Hmm.
same thing with healthcare, which is designed to protect the population even more so? That's kind of the justification of nationalizing healthcare, which every other normal country has done. which is a huge area of spend. So there's definitely things that can be reduced in our balance sheet, let's say, in our P&L of the country and how we run our economy. But we also need to figure out, okay, if there's certain, if we have this big transition and a big part of the population is going to struggle with this, we need to figure out a way to help them make that transition. And maybe there is a future where everybody's an entrepreneur and everybody knows everything and they can start their own businesses and sell to each other, and it's going to be a happy utopian place. But it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a good narrative there about the entrepreneur stuff, but yeah, like not everybody is capable of it too. So, one thing that you said there, and I'm gonna do this for the clips, but what is your take on U.S. versus Canada healthcare system?
Um, so US versus Canada healthcare system, I don't know enough about the Canadian healthcare system besides the fact that US is unique in completely private system where um, there are many people who can't afford the basic healthcare, and that means that they don't catch things on an annual physical, and it becomes terminal cancer or some other, big four disease. So that's kind of a non-starter, right? That's the basic that has to be fixed. One suggestion I've heard that's interesting is to every year reduce the age of Medicare by 1 year. So we gradually get to the system where you qualify and you can take the Medicare option, at 64, 63, 62, 61, etc. By the time you get there, you kind of, you make the transition. And we kind of phase out the private healthcare system that way
Hmm.
because it'll provide a better option. Um, so it's really about how the billing is handled. You can still say that, all the not all, but most of the best universities and best university education is in the US. So we produce the best doctors, probably, arguably. There are some other countries that do it well, as well, but US at volume does the best. And it's not a question of quality; it's a question of affordability.
Okay.
And we really have to fix this issue with how people are paying, paying in exorbitant amounts of money every month, or their employers are, and they have to factor it in instead of paying their employees the cash in their pocket. They have to budget for $2,000 a month for somebody in their 40s to have basic health insurance. It's crazy.
I've actually been lucky enough to experience both healthcare systems, and I do prefer the American one. Only because I found like you had more competition for care,
Hmm.
and thus it kept I guess, the quality level high, um, and premiums low. In Canada, it's it's a little bit cumbersome to get the right care at the right time. Um, yeah, and it's I'll just say that like definitely there's not the bankruptcies that happen in the US because I've heard that too. Like the healthcare if you get
Yeah.
um you've heard that, right? Like it's the number one
I
source
think
of
something
bankruptcy.
like I think something like 40% of the population has medical debt
Hmm.
in this country, right?
Yeah, which is something unheard of that I've heard in Canada. So that part I get. Like you don't want to get sick and then all of a sudden you're bankrupt because of it because Canada doesn't allow that to happen in a certain sense. But there are trade-offs and I think like it could be run optimally so that people have a little bit more
I think it's,
options.
yeah, I mean, certainly there's competition, right? But let's say being in the top 1%, sure, I can afford to pay and I'll have the best healthcare in the world. But if we're talking about kind of from the perspective of government,
Hmm.
I want maximum percentage of the population to have the best outcome. And it's kind of orthogonal. The cost structure is one thing, and then the quality of care is probably a separate thing. And they don't necessarily overlap 100% at least. There's certainly some competition for the best doctors, and you can only have so many best doctors.
Yeah.
But the other thing is US has an advantage because it's 10 times the population of Canada,
Hmm.
right? California has more population than all of Canada, and that means that you can divide the risk by a larger population. and you can
Yeah.
provide the opportunity for providers, for doctors, to have a bigger potential market. The insurance, there's other elements if we really drill down on this. And again, I'm not an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous. Um, for example, the cost of malpractice insurance in the US is so high. I
Yeah.
know somebody who was a pediatric neurosurgeon, and this is many years ago, but first year he was in private practice, his insurance on its own was like $90,000 a year, and would just climb from there as he builds up the cases, right? The historic cases that he could be sued for,
Hmm.
um, which doesn't exist to the same degree nearly in other countries, right? You'd really, it's a very U.S. is a very litigious society, and we pay for it because then there's malpractice insurance and all these things that are created on top of that as a cost structure. So
Hmm.
there's definitely ways to kind of cut all of that down and reform the entire healthcare system. Question is, is there going to be the political will to do that? Looking at history, probably not. So we have to figure out some kind of a phasing strategy, whether it's that Medicare kind of reducing the age of Medicare over time, or something else, or we start kind of sniper rifling like specific cost structures and taking those out of the equation, trying to reduce it. But right now we pay the most and we have the worst outcomes looking at kind of population health by percentage.
Speaking about political will, it feels to me that AI is being used in that way. We saw it with the layoffs at first, where people and companies were laying off just for the sake of it, or they I guess they were using it to justify the layoffs. Um, Not fully correct. However, it was done for reasonings like here's the political will. Like it's almost like here's the reason. So I think that at some point you're right. There's going to be regulation that comes in, and AI might be the political will that we all need.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of different things happening. In tech, we have, the big tech companies hired very quickly during COVID,
Hmm.
and the ones that are doing layoffs, they're still not below their COVID headcount.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of AI washing with certain companies who are just saying, "Oh, we're doing this because we're more efficient. We're laying off." They're not doing it because they're more efficient. They're using that as an excuse
Yeah.
because there's kind of certain trends, starting with Musk coming into Twitter and cutting 80% of the workforce, but not killing the company entirely. They lost half their revenue, but still. And then you saw a bunch of layoffs kind of following that. But reality is they do have to put in a lot of capex, a lot of investment into data centers to keep up with each other, and they have to get that money from somewhere. So they're cutting humans and putting that money into data center to automate things. They are cutting out a number of layers of middle management
Hmm.
traditionally that doesn't need to be there. I wrote a couple of megatrends, two of the 8 megatrends for EY this time around, which is published every 4 years. One of them is kind of on the future of organizations and what that's going to look like. And in
Hmm.
our research, we identified that mostly it's going to be middle management that's going to go.
Hmm.
Right? You're going to have management, you're going to have individual contributors primarily. So yeah, it's we're the tip of the spear, right? It's cannibalizing the tech industry first, but it's going to come for customer service, administrative jobs, all sorts of things. And then ultimately in the physical world, we're going to see it as well, kind of replacing, repetitive tasks in the physical world.
I did see like a little uptick on customer service roles, mainly because people were sick of talking to AI. Or yeah. So did you notice that?
I'm not tracking the labor statistics that closely, but it's, I think the near-term effect is you're going to see the quality of customer service may improve because the systems are smarter
Hmm.
and they solve a call, for example, faster, or they solve a trouble ticket. Instead of 3 round trip emails, it'll do it in one. Those kind of KPIs we're going to see. But inevitably, it's going to reduce the number of people you need in customer service. Maybe not eliminate, but
Hmm.
drastically reduce because they're going to use these automation tools, or the first layer of support will be automated. And you can already see it on any website, right? If
Yeah.
you see a chat support little, in any corner of any website, and the
Yeah.
first layer is already, 99% of the time it's bots before you get to a human. So they're reducing the load for customer service for sure
I mean,
already.
we see it even at McDonald's when they want to try and get you to go to that kiosk at the front, right? Or even,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a
So
good
talk.
proxy for the same thing. Yeah.
So tell me about your book, your essay, and the thesis behind it, and maybe go through some of the points that you feel will map out the trends for the next 5 years.
Yeah, the book is so I wrote a book 10 years ago called Accelerated Startup, which is kind of soup to nuts on how to start startups. I have a second edition of that coming out this year, which is completely rewritten because 10 years later, AI has kind of rewritten the rules of how startups, what they do, how they do it, and what they focus on. So that's one. The other one is, like I mentioned, political economics book called The Displacement Machine. And what I was, the initial thesis was around kind of this grievance economy, which is young men being pulled into crypto and into supplements and into all sorts of misogynistic content online to try to play the blame game. Psychologically, it's the same thing. Somebody is in a bad place in their life, and they try to find an outside reason why they are in that place, right? And you point and you give them somebody to be angry at,
Mm-hmm.
or you give them an opportunity to opt out. That's how this whole crypto industry works. Crypto is complete nonsense relative to traditional economics. It's like trading nothing, and whoever says that it's just nascent is kind of silly because it's been around for almost 20 years now.
Hmm.
Um, so, but people get pulled into that because they don't feel like they can participate in normal economy, so they need some alternative, some shortcut. That's why that works. What I noticed, so there's that element that's kind of top of mind right now, especially, and it really kind of went through the roof under COVID when people were kind of lonely, alone, and were being pulled into these online communities even more so. Um, Social media has no guardrails, right? Because of Section 230, people can do and say whatever they want. And then before, you had people that were a little twisted that were kind of in line, kept in line because they're part of society. Now they can find each other online, and that's how we see these really negative memes coming about, and kind of these movements. Enter the political entrepreneurs. Political entrepreneurs are people who are taking all of this and pointing them towards political action. And when you saw, Charlie Kirk's funeral, which was at a football stadium, with translated live to a bunch of people, and then you had people going out there and basically giving their version of a Nazi speech. With Stephen Miller's literally the same themes as Nazi speeches. To me, that's like those alarm bells, because then you see this transition from kind of taking, people being economically taken advantage of with all these things that are being sold to them because they have a hole to fill in their mind, to then being pointed at these political movements and using kind of negative campaigning to kind of find a scapegoat and turn people against something, not for something, but turn them against something in that direction. So that's kind of the history lesson there. I also pulled in, things like the Southern Strategy, which was a really important element, and kind of the moral majority, right? This is the movement, the evangelical movement that brought about Reagan, and has been long lasting since then, but started with this churches, this big mega churches, avoidance or trying to avoid taxes on their schools and forcing them to reintegrate schools, but they really turned that political message and all of that. Now, the next question is like, okay, what happens when this gets all even worse? Because a lot of these people come from kind of from areas where manufacturing left the country and kind of gutted society. Um, and you have people who not only lost a paycheck, but they lost community, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
looking at a way to fill that because they don't, they used to be able to graduate high school, know that they can go get a good union job in manufacturing and in automotive assembly, etc. And a couple of years later, they can get married, they can buy a house, they can have kids, they can have a nice middle class life. All that's gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so all of that now, a lot of those people retrained to these jobs that are going to be some of the first affected by AI automation. So it's going to completely kind of, take the floor from under them. So what happens next, right? And kind of trying to think, okay, trying to connect the dots, right? These social entrepreneurs, these political entrepreneurs that are going to take advantage of the situation, and what are they going to do with it? And then looking at other countries and how they've dealt with kind of reintegration. So when you had East and West Germany reintegrate, right, that could have been a potential disaster, but the way they did it, they are the biggest and strongest economy in Europe, right? So
Hmm.
there's hope there. Denmark has a particular way of handling when people get yeah, lose their job, and how they get retrained, and how they preserve community, and how they preserve income, and all those things. So, there's a bit of towards the end, I try to kind of provide a little bit of a prescription on what needs to be done in the next few years, and how much money needs to be spent, which is probably about $100 billion with a B, which is in the big picture not that much. We just spent that on a pointless war in Iran in a few months. But being able to set society on a course where we have this social net, and we kind of help ease this transition to what comes next um, for US. And the next 5 or 10 years are going to be, we're going to, this kind of crisis period started with 9/11. You can argue there's a great book called The Fourth Turning is Here, and it talks about kind of the seasonality in civilization, and that we're in a crisis period now, which will last probably into kind of by 20, into like early 2030s, where we're going to turn, and society is going to feel very different. The last time we had this was, the Great Depression through World War II, right? And you can see the difference between pre-Great Depression, America and the world, and post-World War II, kind of the spring of it all, and how healthy society became, and the economy and the growth we got. So the projection is that we're kind of going through the same thing now, and by, let's say, 2032, 2035, we should be on the other side of it. The question is, how do we navigate these next few years and make sure that our society doesn't break? Because there's no guarantees that it won't.
I love your perspective because you're coming from somebody who has lived in a communist society, and you're now looking at fixing a capitalist society with some sort of communism, people would say. But it's like, am I wrong
There's a
on
lot of
that?
nuance to it, right? There's a lot of
There's a
nuance to it, right?
nuance. Yeah, there's
It's not,
nuance.
it's
Yeah.
not, there's not only capitalism, communism, right? That's very reductionist.
Right.
Even like democratic socialism is not socialism, right? Democratic
Right.
socialism is what most of the countries in Europe are effectively.
Right.
So there's a lot of nuance there. And, I like to say I'm a single issue voter, and that issue is economics.
Hmm.
Because if we have a healthy economic society, then a lot of the other negative things fade away to a certain degree, right?
Is there a country that you would say I would model it after this country?
It's very difficult. US has certain advantages if we just stop being stupid. One of which is that we have this great group of future economy drivers, which are working age immigrants into the US, and we have this amazing resource called Central and South America that we should
Hmm.
welcome with both arms open, and provide opportunity, because these are people who are coming. They're hungry for success. They want to be successful with their families. I'm telling you this as a refugee. My family immigrated out of Soviet Union as refugees before Soviet Union broke up. Um, and they want a good life for their family, and they're going to come, and they're going to drive the economy. Whereas in Asia, even China, we've passed peak China as far as population, because the one child law.
Hmm.
So China's is already been shrinking for the last 4 or 5 years, and will be projected to be half the size by the end of the century,
Hmm.
by the way. And you can't build an economy if your population is shrinking by half, right?
Hmm.
So you need a growing population. We have plenty of room in this country, right? Especially in the middle of the country. Um, and Europe has big structural problems, right? You have an aging population, but they're very much against the migration that needs to happen, and it's always kind of south to north migration, right? And you have North Africa and Middle East as the source of migration into Europe, which I would argue is very, culturally a huge gap between Europe and that population. That's why, and Europe's never been good about integrating immigrants anyway. So there's going to be some structural problems there. But we have this advantage where we can have a relatively young economy. We have a lot of natural resources, so we are on our way. So is there a country to model after? Everything? No, because we have unique advantages, but there's certain things we can learn from Europe as far as a social safety net. We definitely need to fix our healthcare system. We need to get money out of politics, and get to a normal, 10-week campaign, not 2-year campaign with billions of dollars. Because, we have Trump again because Elon Musk gave him $300 million, period. That's the single biggest factor. Um, so, we need to fix certain things, and hopefully we don't break, all the way, and we get a chance to fix those things.
What companies are you excited about that you're investing in right now? Which sector, and within that sector, what do you look for?
So I mean, we're focused, when you're a VC, you're focused on your thesis. You don't
Mm-hmm.
do kind of extracurricular, especially early on with a fund one, you don't do extracurricular investments in random things as an angel. So we're laser focused on robotics because we
Okay.
think, from our research, that's 39% CAGR, a compound annual growth rate projected, which makes it the fastest technology wave of all time, faster than
Mm-hmm.
the internet wave, the mobile wave, social, etc., by far. So that's the area kind of broadly where we're focused on. Um, and generally, we like companies who can become category leaders in their space. They've identified their customer. And also, we are a little bit old school in the way that we're doing a small portfolio, concentrated portfolio of companies, 20 to 30 in the whole fund. And that means it gives us an opportunity to be helpful with each company, open up opportunities for them with potential big customers, help them with supply chain, all those kind of things. So that's kind of the general area. Give you a couple of companies that I'm excited about that I've angel invested in the past, and it's always been products that I like to use. Right? I discover a product that I use or want to use, and I like something about their story. So I'll give you three examples. One is a company called Fitbod, which is I've been involved with them for almost 10 years, and they were one of the first kind of AI personal trainers. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a home gym. I've been going to the gym, an average of 5 days a week for the last 15 years. Um, and um, and this is, it solves a particular need where you basically say, here are my goals, here's how much time I have, what equipment I have, and it'll generate the work and it'll track everything over time, just like a personal trainer would, right? So for $10 a month instead of $100 an hour, you have a personal trainer in your pocket, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. So that's one that made sense a lot to me, and they've grown leaps and bounds. They're one of the leaders in this category these days, and great product, great team. Another one is I've done a lot in mobility, and I was very excited to get involved with Rivian early on and had an opportunity to invest while they were still private. Now their stock performance after IPO hasn't been great. There's been a lot of macro conditions that they couldn't really control. And there's a lot of companies that went under in the sector and they stayed afloat, and they've been able to survive. Now they have their R2, the kind of mass market vehicle launching, and I think that's their kind of Model 3 moment where they're going to go mainstream. So I'm
Okay.
excited about Rivian still. And another one's Perplexity. So Perplexity, I was an early user. I had some friends who invested in them kind of at seed and Series A stage. And I just find they have a very elegant way of solving, and they move very quickly in the space where they don't need the capital investment of the big LLM players, but they're providing that functional layer that's very, very useful to professionals, especially that gives them all the tools in one place.
Okay.
And we use it heavily, and I also had an opportunity to invest in them a couple of rounds ago. So those, generally as an angel investor, and this is very typical behavior, kind of thinking from that perspective, you always invest in things you know and that you're passionate about. As a professional money manager of a fund, you have to set a thesis for a particular category. You have to build up the knowledge base and the institutional knowledge in that area and the network, and invest in the areas where you think are going to be big in a few years, kind of systemically. So that's a long answer for you.
No, no, thank you for that. I think robotics is definitely a good bet. And I look forward to having one in my house one day to do the dishes and stuff. How far do you think we're away from that?
So I'm pretty bearish on humanoids
Okay.
in general. I think so. Think of it this way, and the easiest way I found to explain is look at how many look at the warning sticker in the back of your toaster. right, in your house, and everything that can go wrong with a toaster. Now imagine a 150, 200-pound robot that's walking around the house, around kids, pets,
Hmm.
and elders, around stairs and all sorts of things. Is it safe? I don't know. Um, Probably not yet, and not even close to it. Then the question is like of usefulness, right? If we're creating a new category and this thing is going to cost realistically, I don't know, $20,000. I mean, in US, you have to look at the kind of the average population is they're hanging on to their cars longer, a few years longer now. Like an average age of a car is about 14 years on the road, because they're trying to save money. So how much of the population is going to buy a $20,000 toy, right? Or what is it going to replace for them? Is it going to walk their dog? Is it going to do their laundry? Like, what is it going to do that's displacing current spend that they have at home? So I don't think we don't have many good answers to that just yet. Now, in the commercial environment, then if we look a little bit deeper, yes, robotization of certain tasks then becomes a question of do we have a use case for something that's bipedal that looks like that has a head, has hands, and has feet? That use case is pretty small. You're going to see a lot more use case for like a tracked robot, right?
Hmm.
Big warehouse or big manufacturing plant. It's going to roll around. That's much more efficient than walking like a human. Yeah, so the kind of human scale robotics, that's the question is where's the place for that? Is there a place for that?
Hmm.
So I think the form factors that you'll actually see in production with companies Figure, and we're advising a company called Humanoid that's based out of the UK. Their form factor doesn't look quite like a simple robot with hands and arms and legs. It's usually tracked, having wheels or tracks that it rolls around on, or it attaches to something and it has a sensor array, but it doesn't need to look like a human head with eyes and mouth. We're pretty far away from that. I think we're 5, 10 years away from that. China, if you want to see the future, go to China. They're 5 or 10 years ahead in robotics already, so you can
Yeah.
see what's going to come here after, in the next 5 years.
Amazing. Yeah, I've seen cars that have umbrellas and things like that. So that has a umbrella that goes up and protects them from rain and things like that. I saw that on the timeline.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. There's
Interesting.
there's interesting things, but it's always a question of okay, what's cool and is good content online versus
What
take my
actually?
money. I want to buy this thing. It's going to solve a problem for me. It's going to do a job for me. Like, what am I going to put in my house?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
you're gonna once you become a customer, you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna pull out my credit card and buy this thing. Then you start thinking like, you can buy the Boston Robotics dog. It's cute and it does tricks. Are you gonna
But
spend twenty
but
thousand
what
dollars
does
on
it
that?
do? Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe for commercial purposes, for military, sure, but is that thing? Are you gonna buy it instead of a dog? I don't think so.
No, no.
So
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This has shed a lot of light, and I'm going to be thinking about this conversation a lot because there's a lot that you downloaded, and I'll probably have some follow-up questions, Vitaly. So I'll
sounds good.
talk to you. Yeah.
Well, it's been my pleasure.